This is episode 1208.
Funny, it just came up. I think it was 20 years today. I was in Portugal when I found out I got this role in the US like 20 years ago today, which is kind of bizarre. It just came up as an opportunity. I had a friend who'd come over here and they said they'd loved it. And for me, where I was in my life and where I was in my career, I had two opportunities to go and work at corporate strategy at centric headquarters, which was arguably the sexier job, or to make a good life decision and go live in New York. And for me, at 26, that's a pretty easy decision.
Finance leaders are being told that AI will make decisions faster, sharpen analysis, and perhaps even reduce the need for some of the work finance teams do today. But speed creates its own problem. When an answer arrives in minutes, how do you know you can trust it? And when the underlying data involves cancer care, quality isn't something you trade away for efficiency. In today's conversation, we hear about the tension between scale and confidence, between what technology can produce and what leaders are prepared to act on. The larger CFO question may be this: is AI changing decision-making or simply raising the standard for judgment? CFO Cal Brouilette helps us shed light on what may be the answer after this. Hello, CFO Cal Brouilette is with us. Cal built his finance career across energy trading, power generation, and connected home businesses before moving into enterprise software with Salesforce and Zendesk. He then joined Flatiron Health, where 6 years leading strategic finance prepared him to step into the CFO role. Today, he's helping guide the investments and economics behind a business using oncology data, technology, and AI to advance cancer research and care. Cal, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me, Jack.
So we always begin with this question. We always begin by asking our guests to take a look back. Cal, and I know you began on the other side of the pond. But tell us about some of those experiences you feel prepared you for a CFO role.
Yeah, I think when I look back at my career, and it's hard to believe it's been over 20 years now, I think I've benefited hugely from the cross-industry, across the pond, multiple different types of roles. If I'm honest, I was very fortunate to join a graduate scheme out of university that was preparing future finance leaders. So I rotated 3 times in the first 3 years, ended up in the US, and that's kind of how my US story started. And then energy is an incredibly interesting industry. I think a lot from the outside, people don't quite realize how complicated and interesting it is, but the physicality of it always interested me, the power stations, the pulling the gas out of the ground. And I know sometimes, energy is a dirty word, but we all have to get it. And working for a company that I think did that in the way that we did it, in the right way, and then moving to the US, and looking at the delivery side and increasingly the trading side, which is super, super interesting if you're interested in mathematics and risk management and those types of things. And then obviously, as you kind of alluded to in the intro, like my shift into technology and all that changes about finance and all the things that are the same. I think I just benefited from all of those multiple roles, different geography, and I know we're all English speaking, so there's a lot of similarities. But I think all of that has contributed to kind of me being who I am today.
Yeah, I have to say, it looks like on paper, it looks like quite an exciting career. Just stepping back to when you're in the UK and you raise your hand to go to America. I mean, how does that happen? You're a financial accountant. How does that happen?
Yeah. So like the graduate scheme in the UK that I was on as part of Centrica is a 3-year program. You do 3 or 4 rotations. You qualify and study to become a chartered accountant in the UK at the same time. And the 3rd rotation is actually funny. It just came up. I think it was 20 years today. I was in Portugal when I found out I got this role in the US like 20 years ago today, which is kind of bizarre. It just came up as an opportunity. I had a friend who'd come over here and they said they'd loved it. And for me, where I was in my life, and where I was in my career, I had 2 opportunities to go and work at corporate strategy at Centric headquarters, which was arguably the sexier job, or to make a good life decision and go live in New York. And for me at, 26, that's a pretty easy decision.
As a CFO, I just want to point out to the listeners, you have jumped around quite a bit. Not that very often finance leaders don't really have to move as quite as often as perhaps sales executives or what have you. But you're in Texas for a good number of years, half dozen years. You moved to Silicon Valley with Salesforce. You're there for a number of years. Now you're back on the East Coast in New York. How am I doing? Am I?
You're right. Yeah, it's been a jump around for sure.
Yeah. So help us understand where the energy sector to technology.
Yeah. Interesting question. It's funny because that was the question in all of the interviews when I was interviewing for tech and the transition. I've always been interested in technology. I was very close, weeks away from going to do a computer science degree instead of a general business degree. And I kept that interest throughout kind of my career. The move was really about geography. We made the decision to move to California before I had a job. My wife had accepted a job out on the West Coast. We knew we didn't want to end up in Texas long term. That wasn't our choice. So we were going to go give it a good try in San Francisco. And if you want to work in San Francisco, you should probably work in technology. So that was it was just inevitable, logical.
Did you enlist did executive search help, or were you?
No, I was a bit earlier in my career. I'm going to be honest. It was the first time where I've kind of quit my job and said, right, I'll go find one. And I enjoyed probably 48 hours of freedom. And then I was like, oh God, I might never get a job again. So, it was very much a little bit of executive search, but really cold calling on tech companies. And if I'm brutally honest, there's a arrogance probably isn't the right word, but there's definitely a misunderstanding about how complicated energy is and how those skills and things that I'd learned about, low margins, complex issues, the difference between power generation economics, trading economics, and how that might translate into, supporting a business like Salesforce was a difficult thing for me to bridge. And that was my job in interviews, was to kind of bridge that.
Yeah, very interesting. For the audience to appreciate this, again, you were in Houston with an energy company for 6 years. Mm-hmm. Talk about a cultural shift. Then you go to Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and you establish yourself there. And that you're talking about the interview that got you there. Anyway, it seems a little bit risky, and some folks wouldn't be willing to, or be able to make the cultural change, I think. Did you initially misjudge anything here?
No, I as I said, I think I did misjudge quite how small, like esoteric industries are to those outside of industries, whatever industry it is, right? The lack of it, unless you're in it, you don't really understand how it works and how people work and how people think. So, technology people and people in Silicon Valley looking at someone who comes from an old industry and a mature industry like energy, similar to the way that those people will look at Silicon Valley and not understand the way that CFOs and leaders think and work over there. I think I misunderstood quite the gravity of that. I assumed, I've come from business school and I had a pretty well-rounded back. I just assumed everyone saw leaders as leaders. And being in a mature industry, leaders like myself benefit from lots of history, and lots of learning and lots of structure that doesn't necessarily exist in Silicon Valley and is sometimes frowned upon because you want to move so quickly. And I get that. But I think I've benefited from that in that I've had great training and great education. I've seen good leaders. I've seen what good looks like, and translating that across was, quite complicated to explain that was going to be a benefit to them. And I think I proved that once I got there, but like explaining that is really hard.
Is there maybe and you're sharing something that's changed, but is there a belief about finance that maybe you acquired early and abandoned along the way? Sort of a notion of the role finance played, perhaps.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. Yes, there's definitely a different way to look at it. I think, I'm 46, coming up 47 now, and, I was educated on classic finance and classic market finance, market economics, and that has just, it's not true anymore. Whether we want it to be true, whether we want free long-term cash flow to be the driver of valuations for businesses and the way that businesses are run and the way that we incentivize people, that has changed hugely. And, sitting next to the investor relations team at Salesforce, like with my back to those guys and being able to be immersed in a very different industry that work in a very different way, it just changed my perspective entirely. I think the combo of those benefits me hugely here because I can see the advantage of both, wanting to run a very economically positive, cash flow positive, long-term strong economic models, but also understanding the importance of the markets and the importance of investors. That's something I didn't really understand until I'd moved into tech.
At Salesforce, I made a note that it was go-to-market finance and strategy. Yeah. I mean, you were really in the guts of the operation.
Yeah. Yes, Salesforce is structured in a very odd way from a finance perspective. It's a single P&L, so the finance teams are structured around functional support rather than, business unit support with all functions within them, for example. So, yeah, and Salesforce is a sales engine for sure, and being part of that hiring, sales strategy and the go-to-market changes and what the acquisition means and quotas and incentives and all that type of stuff was very, very eye-opening. Not really the thing that I love the most, if I'm quite honest. I much prefer to be closer to business decisions than I am to kind of just go-to-market stuff, which is why one of the reasons why I left. But it was super, super interesting, and I learned an awful lot from my experience there.
Is it that part of your career when you land in Silicon Valley that you begin thinking, and maybe it was earlier, maybe you always wanted to be a CFO, but when did the office seem to come into focus for you?
Honestly, I've gone back and forth on this. I've always really wanted, and I've said this and I've meant it to find my natural ceiling. Right. And I didn't necessarily think and at some point, probably about 5 years ago, I was like, maybe I won't get there and that's okay. And maybe the only thing dragging me to want that is pride, which, a lot of us have. We want to get that title and be at the peak of the pyramid. And, so I don't think it ever entered my mind specifically. I've always thought, at least from kind of 7-8 years into my career, that I could do the job. And I could probably do the job better than some of the people I've seen it. And there's a degree of arrogance and confidence in that statement. I'm very, very self-aware of that. But that is the only thing that kind of drove me to it. Like this, the way I got to this role was to do my job here and for people to see that I could do that job before I took the job. And then, I found a natural home, felt comfortable here, wanted to do it, was excited about the opportunity. So I don't think there was ever a point. It's never anything I've climbed the greasy pole for want of a better term. But yeah, it's just natural progression, I guess.
You were at Flatiron. You came in to head up strategic finance. You were in that role for 5 years before you entered the CFO office. You are a known entity there. And yet 5 years at strategic finance. Can you tell us how that might have changed your leadership style, the role of leading strategic finance, how that changed?
I would say like strategic finance is an interesting term because it's just a very sexy way to say FP&A with in the best possible sense of a traditional
Broader sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think I've run teams very similar to this one before. The teams that I ran at various points within my energy experience were very, very similar in that we had an FP&A team and a decision support team. So essentially your traditional FP&A and your support of the business investments. So it wasn't a huge stretch for me. It was the first time I'd come into a relatively small company. We were, and still are under 1,000 people when you exclude some of our part-time employees, and built something from scratch. And that was very, very different. And the first, I would say, 18 months were kind of rebuilding the team, building the infrastructure that still supports us today and putting that in place in a way that was stable, the reporting and all the things that go around building something from scratch. That was super exciting, right? You don't usually take someone else's, mess sometimes and have to fix it. This was all on me, and that opportunity was great for me. And obviously I worked for a great CFO. Our CFO at the time, Jason, was very, very supportive, was very clear about what he wanted from me and what his skills were and what his future was. That the long-term opportunity of the role is what got me here and quite frankly has kept me here.
All right. We'll have a few more career-related questions for you a little later. Right now, for listeners who might be new to Flatiron Health, what does the company do? What does it provide? Whom does it serve? And where's the opportunity here?
Yeah. So I'm going to try, as everyone has here, is to take something that's quite complex and make it as simple as possible. Fundamentally, Flatiron Health is a health tech company focused on oncology. Our goal is to essentially do whatever we can to learn from every oncology patient to generate better outcomes for oncology patients. So all people that get cancer, learn from as many of those people as possible. And ultimately that will lead to better care for those people and better outcomes for those people. So that is our goal. How do we do that? It's most simplest concept. We have a two-sided P&L. So we're not a single product company. We're essentially a two-sided P&L. On the left side of that, it doesn't really matter left and right, but just for labeling purposes, we have our biggest customers on that side are community oncology. So for those that don't know, community oncology is basically where between 50 and 60 and some, depending on some estimations, more than 60% of cancer care is administered in the US. So that is hugely important. The other is big hospitals that we're all used to, big hospital systems. If you live in New York or big cities, that's where you go to get your cancer care. Community oncology is more than half. So more than half of the people who have cancer are treated in these places. And what we do is help through software and technology. We help those community oncology clinics be as efficient and effective in delivering care as possible. The primary way that we do that is our core Onco EMR product, and EMR is, electronic medical record, product that has a bunch of services around that, and the technology around that. And that is our left-hand side of our P&L. So doing what we can to support those clinics to provide the best care they possibly can in the most efficient and effective way. On the right-hand side, just because, again, I'm labeling things, of the P&L, we service pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies with real-world evidence. Now, real-world evidence is just learning from all the data that is collected from our community oncology clinics and some partnerships that we have with bigger academic medical centers. All of the data that is captured, structured or unstructured, when someone gets care over the lifetime of that care exists. What we do and where our technology and our oncology specific expertise, the scientific expertise that we have in-house, is to take all that data and turn it into really, really useful information. And what that results in at the core is these disease specific longitudinal data sets that we can learn from and work with our partners to kind of understand oncology's biggest questions in the real world. Because these aren't scientific settings, these are real world settings. And that information is just unbelievably invaluable.
Now, is it Today it's owned by Roche, is that correct?
Correct.
And curious how that's ownership has shaped Flatiron's investment priorities, while at the same time, preserving its independence, its credibility.
Yes, yeah. Actually, when it comes to the acquisition, it was pre-me, but I know, and it won't come to a surprise as anyone that when a big pharmaceutical company buys someone like us, and we service small oncology clinics, and other big pharmaceutical companies, right? So both sides of our P&L, there was, some questions about integrity and trust and what are we going to do with the data, and how are we going to invest? How is Roche going to invest? But we've spent an awful lot of time building the trust. It's taking years to build the trust that we are independent. Fully independent. Yes, we're a subsidiary, but we work very, very independently of Roche. Roche is a major customer of ours and continues to be, but we work fully independently of that. And we've worked really, really, really hard to build that trust on both sides of the P&L. From an investment perspective, they have been fantastic owners. I can say that. I would say that they probably weren't as focused. I would say we weren't as focused on how we invested money in the first few years of that partnership and of that ownership structure. But over the past 4 years, we've, I think, with a little bit of focus and some more constraint, which is helpful to a finance person who wants to drive economic improvement. We've done great things together and have a fantastic partnership with the board. And we think about this business long term still. Roche thinks in 10, 20-year cycles, right? It's very different to traditional owners of tech companies. So we benefit hugely from that.
I'd like to understand better how Flatiron makes money today, and which economics matter more. Is it technology platforms, or is it data? Evidence services. Yeah.
So there's really three pieces when you look at the way that Flatiron makes money. One is that we have this community oncology software that we sell. Think of it as a traditional SaaS, just to be really easy, really simplistic, and it's oversimplistic. Traditional SaaS product that is sold on a per MD basis to our community oncology clinics. The second part is the actual sale of the data. So we have these single disease data products that are longitudinal in nature. They get refreshed. We can sell that on a one-time basis, on a subscription basis with very, very recent data. So that data sale is a large part of what we do. And then increasingly, particularly over the past 2 or 3 years, we have a services and analytical support business that essentially puts the data and services together to help clients really understand and use that data in the best way possible. So there's 3 ways. There's software, there's pure data sales, and then there's broader solutions that encapsulate both services and analytical support and the data.
When you're really looking into the business, trying to understand performance and future performance, we're always interested in what are your early signals? Is it just simply customer renewals? Is it stuff from the SaaS world that we're?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. We look at. So from a growth perspective, most of our growth, because we have quite a big oncology, community oncology footprint today, so that will not grow hugely. That is not our growth engine. Our growth engine is essentially on the right-hand side of the P&L, so these data and analytical sales. So where we focus on that is, and where we've focused our technological investments over the past kind of 3 years, is in increasing the scope and scale of our data sets. So, for example, we went from 500,000. We used to have to, because it was manually curated and we used a lot of humans, and now AI and LLMs are incredibly, incredibly powerful and powerful enough to reach the quality bar that we have here at Flatiron. We now have 5 million patients instead of 500,000 patients. What that enables us to do is solve different use cases for clients. So now when I look at it, I look at segment by segment, customer by customer, how are we growing, what are we providing to them, how are those partnerships developing, very much about bookings. Renewals are important, but when you look at the customers that we have and some of the deal sizes that we have, we're really talking about long-term relationships. And sometimes within that, it's a swap in or a swap out. You know, this is a problem that we wanted to solve before. This is the problem we need to solve now. So it's very much about the broader renewals plus new sales component of that. And then the account management aspect of those types of things. How happy are they? How are the relationships? Who are we engaged with? What types of problems are we solving?
So as the company expands its oncology data capabilities globally,
Mm-hmm.
how do you decide where further investment should be made?
Yeah, so there's two real ways. So globally, you know, we have spent a lot of time building a footprint outside of the US, as you just kind of stated, particularly Japan, Germany, and the UK. They are the three biggest markets outside the US for pharmaceutical companies. So that's the place where the data is most valuable. So when we made that decision to go in, it was very much about size, scale, opportunity. Today, where we invest and how we think about investment is very much about, you know, how quickly can we, there are two ways that we can kind of broaden what we do. Our goal is to continue to broaden the number of patients that we can learn from, because when you think about the way that increasingly that cancer is treated and thought about and researched, every one of those buckets is getting narrower and narrower and narrower, which is great because the bigger buckets we're getting better drugs and better treatments and better outcomes for. But it's an incredibly complicated problem, curing cancer. And the bigger the data sets are, the easier it is to get to the specific types of patients that we're trying to look for in order to learn from. So scale is one that we look at as a lens, not just the size of the data set, but the types of people within the data set. That is hugely, hugely impactful for us. So we put a lot of time and effort in thinking about how we grow that network so that we can support the types of questions that our partners have. That's probably the biggest one. The second biggest one, obviously, I'm going to talk about is AI and technology and how we make what we do as efficient and effective as possible. But we've come so far, as everyone has, with the LLMs and the technology that we have with AI today. You know, that's not going to let up soon, and working out how we build that in a sustainable way, and in a way that helps us grow as quickly as possible and provide the data and the answers to the complex questions that we have as quickly as possible is where we put a lot of our chips right now.
Well, that's where we'd like to dig a little deeper with you. Where is AI perhaps producing the most meaningful business value today?
Yeah, for us, most definitely, it is in the basically the secret sauce of what we do, the extraction and curation of data. So when I joined the company, we have and had at that point in time a big workforce of part-time nurse practitioners who translate a lot of the information into data that can be structured, right? So unstructured data into structured data, that was always been supported for at least for the past 8 years, through machine learning and things that support that type of extraction. Increasingly, one of the things I talked about earlier was the fact that we used to learn from 500,000 patients. That wasn't because we only had 500,000 patients. It was because it was incredibly labor intensive and therefore incredibly expensive to extract that information. Over the past 2.5, 3 years, LLMs have become so powerful, and we've worked so diligently around that we can now use LLMs to extract a lot of that information. Not all of it, and not for all diseases, but increasingly extract information at the level of quality that we are the gold standard for quality, RWE. I've got no qualms about saying that. We want to maintain that. We will maintain that. But LLMs now are powerful enough to enable us to build those in a way and use those in a way that we can now learn from every cancer patient. And our goal is to increasingly roll these out. When you look at our product suite, what we call this is our panoramic data set. And that means we use everything within the data set. It's not sampled data set. And we have many of those in markets. We'll release more this year and we'll release more next year. It's a massive, massive unlock for us, both in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, but speed of that. So that's been hugely, hugely impactful for us. Massive driver of growth. This year, and I would say probably over the past 18 months, we've also been investing an awful lot of time in an agentic layer that sits across the top of that. You know, we've advertised it. It's out there and being tested by some of our customers today. We call that Flatiron Telescope. And what that enables us to do is essentially in real time, from a scientific perspective, with natural language, question and analyze that data in real time. Whereas before, it would have taken us potentially days to answer a question about, do you have this type of patient? What type of patient is in here? What about this? What about this criteria? And if I put this criteria in, and we would have a bunch of scientists and data scientists sitting around to work out how to answer that initial question, just to work out if we have the data to answer the real question. And today we have Telescope, which just does that in real time. It's a fantastic piece of software that sits across, and we're super excited about getting that out into the space.
Interesting example for us. Thank you. We wondered, let's narrow our lens on finance for a moment here. And, you know, we've had these conversations with different finance leaders and heard about how AI has improved perhaps the speed, the automation of things. But we're looking to see how it might be changing analysis or how decisions are made. Any reflections on what you've seen or?
Yeah, I think AI is incredibly powerful, but it's just a tool, right? And I think it's a powerful tool. So I'm going to be really honest about how I feel about AI, and that it is, I think sometimes we jump the shark a little bit on this type of stuff. For me, because we're a relatively mature company with stable, good systems in place, there isn't an easy way for me to plug it in. But I would say where we are spending most of our time, to get to your kind of actual question around analytics, we've spent the last 2 years trying to build a really robust data platform, pre-AI, before we knew we could afford it and could use it and could implement it well. A customer, essentially a data warehouse that sits and takes all our operational data, centralizes that and makes it available to me and to operations and analytics teams. The fact that AI can plug into that now and I can answer questions in real time is insane. And we've been piloting various different general AI to sit across that and to plug into that. That I think is hugely important. I for myself piloted it for about 3 months. We've used various different tools to try and see which ones are the best from a finance perspective. But I can literally just ask it a question that I would ask an analyst, and it will give me back an answer, as long as you have the right context layers, of course, within there. That is probably 90% of a verbal answer that I would get from probably an entry-level analyst in minutes. And don't get me wrong, the only reason I trust it is because I understand the data in a way. And that's the thing that's going to be most interesting, Jack, I think, is how do we get from, yes, that's a great answer, it looks great, it's almost email ready, to, do I trust it? And that trust piece is where we internally at Flatiron, we're not quite there yet. We're still trying to work out how we build the level of audit, the right level of sophistication, and the right level of double checking and confidence in that tool for us to really get the best value out of it. But it's incredibly powerful. I've been incredibly impressed by just off the shelf software.
So if we were trying to summarize the challenge facing your finance team and Flatiron Health, I guess at large, you're scaling. It would be, the challenge is to scale AI extracted data while protecting trust and turning that capability into, sustainable economics.
That's absolutely right. No, absolutely right. It is about quality, it is about trust, and it is about scale. And managing and balancing those three things is bang on. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Well, we are up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment. And again, this might have happened anytime during your career, Cal. So it might have happened 20 years ago, when you were just arriving in the States. It might have happened last week. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, it's actually a question I thought. Obviously, I've listened to your podcast, multiple versions and episodes of it, and I thought about this quite a lot. And the one that always comes back to me is when I was at Direct Energy, a subsidiary of Centrica. It was 2013, I think. At that point in my career, I was managing a pretty big team. I had the finance and the accounting team, so I was essentially a small kind of business unit CFO. I was at business school. So I'd gone to Rice to do my MBA, and I decided that I was going to load up on all of my classes in the fall because I thought, I'm pretty stable in this job. Fall is relatively quiet except for budgeting. And I thought that was a great decision. And then I got called into the CEO's office, and he said, we need to sell the power plant portfolio that we have. And we'd really like to have it sold and announced before the end of the year. And this was, late September. So we had 120 days max to sell this business. So I had to manage that workload. I ran that from, soup to nuts from a finance perspective. Everything from, the whole valuation that we walked into negotiations with through, my place in the management presentations, through to, the purchase and sales agreement terms. I remember sitting in my bathroom in Houston at 3 a.m. talking to someone from Blackstone, negotiating, the specifics of both, the purchase and sales agreement and the transition service agreements that we had in place. And, I think that's, from my perspective, that was the first time where I was like, you talked about it earlier and asked me when I thought about being a CFO. Like, that was the first moment where I was like, you know what? Yes, this was hard, but I'm confident coming out of that, this was a $700 million deal, and they were asking me to make the call about whether it was go or no go. And, that was the point where I was like, you know what? I can do this job. I can make these decisions. I've learned enough at this point. I can still keep learning, that I have the confidence to make important, incredibly high stakes decisions in a short period of time that I know will drive value for the company. So that was the first point where I went from being like an operator, I would say, to someone who thinks kind of more strategically, because you have to in no time.
Great moment of insight for us. Thank you for that. We're going to jump to what we refer to as the mentoring round. We're going to ask you to look back again. And we've been residing there for a little bit of this episode. Hey, when you and you just mentioned this in passing, your MBA when you're down in Houston. Mm-hmm. Just for those career builders out there, we'd love to know your decision making around that. Was it just a good time to do it? You were there for a spell, 5-6 years down in Houston. What was your rationale? Would you recommend it?
Yeah. Look, I'd recommend it to anyone who can afford it. And I'm brutally honest, and everyone that has ever worked with me will know that that's the case. I was very fortunate, that my MBA was essentially funded by the company, and I'd found out that that was an option for me, and I was considered a high performer, and the CEO had to sponsor it, but they did. So when I looked at what my career might become and what I might want it to become, I knew that an MBA, whether you agree with it or not, is beneficial to anyone's career. And I looked at that, and I looked at my career, and I looked at the investment it would require. And quite frankly, I walked on Rice's campus and said, wow, I've never learned in a place like this. And I always like to learn. I think it'd be great to come and learn here for 2 years. The risk is relatively low. I want to stay at Direct Energy for a couple of years, and that's all they required. And I think it would be fun. And the combination, it's always been those life decision plus work, the big decisions, whether I move to New York or San Francisco or back to the East Coast. It's always been a bit of both. It's never really been driven by one or the other. And that was very much true of my MBA. I have a ton of friends from that and learned a lot from that.
Were you aware of that when you joined,
no.
Direct Energy?
No, it was just one of those things.
Came your way?
Random conversation in a hallway with someone from HR. That's how I got it.
Wonderful. All right. Well, that's very interesting. Hey, Cal, we always like to ask a question from the personal side of things. We're wondering if you could share something that maybe your colleagues might not know about you. After 6 years, they know a lot about you, but something from your past, something most people might not know about you.
Yeah, it's actually quite a tough one because, as I've said, I'm incredibly transparent and Here's what I would say. Here's what a lot of people don't know about me. I once got hit by a double-decker bus and survived. So I think that is an incredibly kind of random fact that most people do not know. Very much like the night bus from Harry Potter, for anyone that reads Harry Potter. Managed to survive it, gave the bus driver a heart attack. But yeah, I think that's probably one thing that people don't know.
Americans don't know how to cross the street in London. What were you doing? I don't know. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That's a scary thing. A hospitalization?
No. I was very, very fortunate. I was a young rag doll and just bounced across the pavement a little bit and survived.
Okay. Wow. Good one. What about, would you have a book selection for us? And it doesn't have to be a book. Maybe it's a resource, something that's influenced you along the way. I don't know.
Yeah. Most of what I read is fiction, to be quite frank. I need an escape from work sometimes because I love work and it defines me. Harvard Business Review is still continues to be for me a fantastic source of learning, both kind of academic and non-academic. It doesn't matter what subject it is. A lot of things don't change that much. A lot of books are just recycling kind of old concepts, but Harvard Business Review is always talking about whatever is, front and center, in a way that just resonates with me. So I've always have a Harvard Business Review subscription and find it incredibly valuable and find it valuable to kind of educate kind of my teams with, because they're usually short form, they're easy to understand, they explain concepts really, really well, and they have a massive back catalog of things that can be used for kind of training and education. So I would say Harvard Business Review is probably the strongest thing for me.
Great reminder for us. Thank you for that. We are up to our final question. We're going to ask you to look forward finally. We're interested in your priorities for the coming 12 months as a CFO. What would those be?
Yes. So actually we touched on exactly kind of a few of these things just a moment ago, but growth is the number one priority of the company. So, we are profitable now, and I don't think it's, we're not a publicly traded company. We sit within Roche, but I think it's well known that we're profitable now, and balancing those two things. So helping drive the right level of change and a different emphasis, and the right level of investment to drive that growth. And that is exactly what we talk about. AI. How much do we invest in AI and technology to drive that? How much do we invest in network development and network growth? The next 3 months is where we go through planning and long-term planning and short-term kind of what we would call budgeting. And we will spend an awful lot of time over the next few weeks talking about what is the right place and the right speed of investment in these areas, given, and that tug and pull of AI is moving so fast, we can't get behind, but at the same time, we've got to do it in a very thoughtful way that maintains trust, maintains quality, and gives, quite frankly, our customers what they want and what they need, not necessarily what we think they need. And that is a battle that we're fighting every day. It's one we talk about every week at the executive team meetings. And but that's really the focus. How do we grow in the right way? And as we're growing and after we make these decisions, how do we make sure what we thought was going to happen is happening? That is a piece of rigor and a muscle that we've started to build and are getting better at, but has really been my focus since I've become CFO, is that how do we really not just make a decision and let it ride, but how do we make a decision and understand how we're going to make sure we know that decision was the right decision, and how do we track that and make sure we don't go too far along the wrong path. So continuing to build that muscle and understanding it within the organization is kind of my point of focus.
Cal Brouilette, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.